Welcome back to Truck Talk. I'm your host, Tyler Christensen, and today I have with me Mr. John Love, former chairman and the current executive director of the Motor Carrier Insurance Education Foundation. John is also the former principal of W11 Associates of Burlington, North Carolina, and I've had the great opportunity of working with him for a few years, as long as that great staff. So welcome, John. Appreciate you taking the time to sit with me today.
Thanks a lot for having me. You used the word great twice. I think you probably overshot a bit, but it's nice to be with you.
Well, we want to keep you in this role, so we've got to build you up a bit.
Well, maybe.
Well, let's start with that. I want to talk to you a little bit and give you the opportunity to kind of share your experience with MCIEF. You've served in various roles. You've been a long friend to Tommy. So let's start there. What made you want to get involved? How long have you been involved? In what capacities have you served, amongst your years?
Tyler, I actually, when Tommy called a group about 11 years ago, because this is our 10th year, discussing what he wanted to do, his next step, what he thought could be his legacy. I'm pretty positive of this. Every person that he called said, absolutely, I'd like to be involved. Because you got to think of it, by the time that MCF came around, Tommy's reputation as, call him what you want, the premier truck insurance educator, the guy that has taught more people the right stuff, probably than everybody else put together, for not just a year, not just a decade, but for several decades. The guy that I can't remember half the names of the people I met year before last, and Tommy knows everybody back to, basically when the wheel was invented, right up through, what's going on in Washington today. So like the folks, and really good folks, by the way. That would be the other thing. When Tommy puts a group together, he's, maybe present company excluded, he seems to be a great judge of character. So 10 years ago, MCIEF, and been involved ever since. Dwayne Smith was the first chairperson of MCIEF from True North. Stunningly great, bright, visionary guy. I love his, he says the most important thing in insurance is R&D. You know what that is, don't you?
I do. Well, I think I do. You tell me your version.
Rob and duplicate. So the point is, a lot of what MCIEF has tried to accomplish over the last 10 years is to put ourselves in the position of doing the best job.
Yeah.
And, the best job in anything that relates to insurance is probably not something you invent. It's something that you work on from a previous point in your career or what somebody else is doing. How do I do it better? And I think MCIEF in that way is the best thing Tommy has done. In other words, prior to MCIEF, all of the education that Tommy has been involved with did not reach all the different distribution levels of the truck insurance industry. So right. The fact that you've got wholesalers, direct writers, MGUs, retail agents, big ones, small ones, carriers that compete against each other, the people that support our industry from all levels together in the same room and sharing information with each other.
Right.
I think it takes a special group. So it's been easy to be involved with Tommy. And I stopped working at Love a year and a half ago, and Joe Huddlemeyer decided to retire the second time. By the way, we wouldn't be here without Joe Huddlemeyer, if you don't mind me saying that, because
Absolutely.
Joe takes the job and he's working on things, and then you get this COVID. Well, you must understand that MCIEF couldn't spell virtual presentation when COVID began. Yeah, and the fact that, and we may not be the best in the world at our virtual presentations, but we've come a long, long, long way, and you have to give him complete credit for saving MCIEF's annual conference virtually when we couldn't meet in person.
Sure.
And so now when you look at it just 2 years later, you want to come this way or you want to come that way? I mean, you can sit at home or you can come and join the crowd, and either works for us. And
Sure.
That is our modus operandi now. So when Joe decided to retire, I thought, well, yeah, I know the people. I know you. I know a lot of folks. It's good for me, by the way, because it lets me stay involved in an industry that I love. And I'm a disciple of Tommy Ruke. I don't mind telling anybody that. I love the Kingpin, the Pickle Man, and I have known him for a long time. So I'm waiting for him to slow down, Tyler. You know,
I know.
I'm not kidding. I mean, I'm tired. I want to go to sleep, and Tommy's sending texts and emails. I mean, like at 11 o'clock at night, and then again at 5:30 in the morning. He doesn't stop. He's like a top.
How long have you known him?
In 1985, the National Association of Insurance Commissioners decided that insurance agents needed to have continuing education. And it was so discombobulated, the thought process, that the original thing was if you had 45 non-residence licenses, you had to have 45 sets of continuing education to satisfy each state. So you'd be in class basically, the whole year.
Yeah, yeah.
And a guy named John Hayden, who was president of American Modern Home Insurance Company in Cincinnati, was on the education committee with me of the AAMGA, the American Association of Managing General Agents. And he said, we were trying to figure out what to do. And we had like the brain trust. These were really bright people trying to figure out how to do continuing education. And Hayden says, there's a guy in Fort Myers, Florida, Tommy Ruke. He's got this figured out. So we called him. I met him. He did have it figured out. When no one, by the way, when I say no one else, I don't think any other firm knew how to file courses so that every state would accept them, would report to CE so that you would get that all lined up properly if you needed it. And really, if you think about one thing that hasn't changed, that has been a cornerstone of every educational offering Tommy's been involved with, and certainly including MCIEF. So back to 1985. And what's funny is that he was a lot younger than I am now when I met him, but time marches on.
That's right. That's right. Well, you both have been a big part of this organization. Tommy continues to be a big part of this organization. But I want to get out of the MCIF and get into the fun questions for a bit. You've been in the industry a long time, clearly just from our learnings today of, where you've been and certainly where you're headed with MCIF. But, what's the one thing, knowing today's trucking environment that you wish you would have known 25 years ago?
You were kind enough to give me a list of questions beforehand, which I'm appreciative of, because sometimes you have to think long and hard about how you would answer one. This question is the easiest question. I would be surprised if anybody that's been around for a long time answers it any differently. I wish I had known when I started every lie that is commonly told.
Fair enough.
And my opinion about truck insurance is everybody would tell the truth, absolutely 100% truth, if you gave it away for free. As soon as you start charging money, things get misrepresented. And you, as the private investigator of the whatever it is that you're trying to figure out, are confronted with things that sound plausible if you don't know that they absolutely can't occur. So the baptism by fire that unfortunately most everybody goes through, you probably got a few stories yourself. I wish that I wish I'd known all the falsehoods like presented to me straight up. I was lucky. I worked with a group of very experienced people from day one. So I had people I could walk around the office and say, hey, can a truck really go 185,000 miles a year? I mean, with one driver, is that really possible?
Right.
It is, as long as you're going downhill like 100 miles an hour, other than that.
Yeah, I had the benefit of the internet when I started underwriting. But I've heard the stories of the old days when, and applications too. I mean, applications, even when I started, were 2 pages, where now they're 8 to 10 pages. But, and I still don't know that we can cover everything. But, the internet's been the greatest underwriting gift for sure.
Well, you don't have to know anything. You just look it up, I guess, right?
You're right. You're right. So tell me about the craziest claim you've ever dealt with.
Well, actually, my dad, I worked for my dad for about 35 years, and that was the greatest thing that ever happened because, first of all, he was like the nicest guy. And it's a blessing when you can work with family and it works well. When my dad was a young man. A lot of people ask me, why is there so much truck insurance in Burlington, North Carolina, or in North Carolina in general? The answer is, before deregulation, North Carolina is the shortest distance to the most people, the central mid-Atlantic state, so being the mid-Atlantic state. And so that's why there were so many truck lines in the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s in North Carolina. And that's a lot of the emanation of why there's so many different firms still there today. But my dad's senior partner, a guy named Bob Halliburton, who was one of the co-founders of Seaboard Underwriters, this was the deal. The most expensive commodity shipped from North Carolina were cigarettes. And so theft was obviously a big deal, right?
Right.
So they put padlocks on the back of the trailers to keep the cigarettes from being stolen. And well, the locks would get cut off, or the locks wouldn't get cut off, but the cigarettes would still be gone, which kind of let you know something had happened, maybe an inside job, so to speak.
Yeah.
Anyway, the point is Bob Halliburton invented what's called the wax seal, the seal. You ever heard of a sealed load? A
Yep.
sealed load is basically the same thing that George Washington had on the back of his stationery. His envelopes, you knew it hadn't been opened. So Bob Halliburton said, well, why don't you just put a wax seal on the back of the trailer? You'll know whether or not the door has been opened, irrespective of whether the load's been locked. What it did was it did away with all the driver theft, or made it easy to identify that the theft had occurred before the load got where it was supposed to. And even though I've got a lot, I'm 40, by the way, what is a long time? You said I've been around a long time. What do you think is a long time?
10
What do you
years.
think?
No.
40 years.
40 years.
40 years tomorrow. Tomorrow is my 40th anniversary in the trucking insurance industry. I've been overpaid since day one, by the way, but that's another story for another day. So, I mean, I think, the point is that with all the modern stuff that goes around, there are some historic lessons to learn about how claims can be prevented, how they can be minimized, and how do you change the underwriting of the risk. So that changed that changed the underwriting precept for tobacco products.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, that's new to me. I didn't realize that. These days we have, again, back to the internet, but now to add to it technology. It's a lot easier to mitigate those type of losses these days. With cameras and telematics, and what's happening and who's doing it. But yeah, that's definitely, I didn't know that's how the seal started.
Well, that's what I'm told. I wasn't there on the day that I've just heard the story, but I'm buying
it. I believe it. Well, I mentioned technology, so this next question is perfectly lined up. But at least us, from a carrier perspective, we continue to think about how is autonomous vehicles going to change our industry. What that timeline is, who knows? There's still a lot that has to evolve there. But in your opinion, where do you think the industry is going to have the biggest impact from an insurance perspective as you start thinking about coverage forms and who's driving, who's not driving? Where do you feel like we need to evolve the most as we start thinking about how we accommodate autonomous vehicles from an insurance perspective?
Well, it is a great issue. The obvious one-word answer to when we can have autonomous vehicles, it's not technology, it's infrastructure. I mean, if we're going to have the amount of money that the country will have to spend so that vehicles that are really driving themselves can get from A to B,
sure,
it's imaginable, but it's certainly not budgeted, and it's a long, long way off. Though I would say this: if you take your car, and let's just say it's a 2006, and you go trade it in for a 2022, what you are is amazed at the safety equipment that every vehicle has today. Not just expensive vehicles, but every vehicle. And what is a fact is that all of the things that consumers know about from a safety perspective are amplified of importance and are actually affordable to the point where they are in widespread use for extra heavy truck tractors. So what I do think is that if I was underwriting risk, I've actually said this. Hey, I tell you what, you give me a 40-year-old driver with a clean record who is very well experienced, good person. You put him in a 1995 Mac and let him drive coast to coast. And you give me a 23-year-old driver, same good person, but no experience. Put them in a 2023 Volvo with everything you can have, and ask me who I would want to insure first. It's interesting. It actually changes. It's the first thing in my career that changes the answer about the most important thing is the driver, because that's Tommy Ruke's edict, by the way. If you can only underwrite one thing, underwrite the driver. I don't disagree with that, but I think that, to your point, technology has evolved so much that when it's in proper use, and that includes the word discipline, because a lot of entities are having an issue with the technology because they don't know how to use it to make themselves a better. They know they need it, so there's a whole lot of help, frankly, that the trucking insurance industry can give to the trucking industry in that regard, because your firm and your competitors actually know what a best practice really is today, and you've kept up well with how it's evolving. But from my perspective, the underwriting that I wish that went on, boy, I tell you, don't you wish you could look at a VIN and in the VIN see how the truck is equipped?
Yes.
Because if you could, I mean, you could go back to, here's a question we don't ask in underwriting. What kind of brakes do you have? Because the best Bendix anti-lock stability control system will stop a tractor trailer, 85,000 pounds, about the same distance as a private passenger car, 150 feet, 140 feet. Corvette will stop at 95 feet, but you know what I mean.
Sure.
Whereas a lousy set of brakes, you're talking about twice that distance. So when you're talking about rear end collisions, let's talk about how you can avoid one. You stop.
Sure.
So really, I think if we had the ability as an industry, and don't you believe there's a race to understand very well the technology that your insureds have. So I think that is the next evolution in the information age of the underwriting process, is to be able to really understand the very specific details of the equipment that we're insuring, as well as the demographics of the driving force, and obviously where the risk is traveling and what they're hauling. So just thoughts there.
Yeah, the more information, the better. And that's the challenge, for years, even after we've moved past, I say we, but, every organization out there going from paperless to, working online and through a computer there's been this plethora of data for years, but it's been what's been documented, and, what do we have available to us to learn from, and we continue to evolve, as a company ourselves. But I think that's the biggest piece for me is, we have to start documenting everything now, because in 5 years, we don't know what's going to be important and what we need to learn from. So I think we've handpicked for so many years these fields that we thought, were required for, to your earlier point, traditional underwriting, where now it's just we need to slam everything we possibly can into something, so that later we can go back and say, you know what, that piece we found out is important and we've never really looked at it. So let's use all this data and make some decisions from it. And I think that's probably the most important piece, because I know that, from what I've learned through this whole advanced analytics, competitors trying to grow, learn from data, lack of data is the biggest issue right now. So, well, let's go back to MCIEF. Where you first got involved, you talked about the virtual component, but let's talk about the material, because I have a perspective on this, but I want to hear your perspective. How do you feel like we've evolved from who we bring in, what we teach about, even the entertainment at today's events versus what it was when you first started?
Well, the asset that we own, if you had to name one, would be our courses. And the library is really quite valuable. Many of them are timeless. In other words, you can file a course outline with the state and not change, but update your presentation over and over. If you were talking about what's going on in Washington, if you're talking about speed limiters, there's certain things where, if you're talking about brakes, there's certain even technical things that you can, this is what's going on. And of course, although those aren't the best examples, that's one of the things that Tommy has done well over his career, including the last 10 years. The way it's evolved now, I would say, is compared to 10 years ago, I'd say our speaker, our teachers, our speaker director, the people that teach, it's a deeper bench. And also the folks that do teach have a lot of passion. I'm shaking my head. No, they said it's the wrong thing to do. They said it's a lie. If he goes like this, they have a lot of passion. No, they have a lot of passion. I mean, to do that. Yeah. I guess what I'm saying is it's hard to believe that this many people would really want to teach at MCIEF. Yeah. I've watched the invitations that Tommy sends, and basically everybody says, sure, I'll be there. I think that one of the ways that the association has evolved is, like I say, a deeper bench and one that is passionate.
We do have the coursework to amend the material to make it current and talk about trending issues. And that's what I enjoy, because there's the continuity in the material, and being involved for myself 8 years, I know what I'm going to come and learn about, but I love to hear, the variety in what we have now with the different speakers and what's happening today. We all think we're in tune, but I every year walk away from something in Orlando that's been happening all year, because we're now at month 10, and I hadn't heard about it. So I think that's the biggest takeaway, is that, just because, I've heard this before, so I wanted to call this out, oh, I've attended a TRS class, or, hey, I've heard Tommy Ruke speak at AMGA, or, oh, I took advanced underwriting, in 2002. The content's consistently evolving and changing. So if you've been with us before, if you've attended previous sessions at an MCIEF class, even if you obtained your TRS designation 10 years ago, when we first got started, the content's different, it's up to date, and that's the most important piece that I wanted to share for today.
Yeah, well, think about it. If we did not do that, how could the organization remain relevant? Because the trucking insurance policy is really the same.
Yeah.
There are very few differences, even from insurer to insurer, from risk bearer to risk bearer. And truck lines basically do the same thing, right? They haul freight. Right. We're insured the same perils. So if we don't evolve and teach about what's current and what's most important, and if you wanted to name just one instance of that, every year you got to listen to Dan Murray, and you got to see what Atri says are the 10 most important things affecting the industry this year, because that's a great example of how the whole organization approaches education. What was important 3 years ago may not be important 3 years from now. So we have to evolve, and that's what we do. And I'm very proud of that. I'd like to say that I could take credit for the fact that that occurs. I can't, but the organization sure can.
So kind of going into our next question, it kind of puts us right at a good ending point. So aside from simply joining, viewers may have heard that in previous sessions, what kind of advice can we give to newcomers, the young up and coming in our industry? It's join, get involved. But aside from joining, what words of advice do you have for potential new members?
If you're not curious, get out of the truck insurance industry.
Yeah.
If you're a curious kid, if your parents, if your mom and dad said you are one curious child, if you're a person that walks by a crooked picture and straightens it, right? There's some attention to detail that's necessary for what we do. If you have the right, and I don't know exactly what it is, the right psychological profile. I know some people that have the right psychological profile. I think your boss has the right psychological profile.
I think you're right.
But if you love the truck insurance industry and you want to be better than your competitors, because let's be blunt about it. I'm happy to be with my competitors at MCIEF, but I want to learn more than any of them.
Yeah.
Because I'm going to go home and I'm going to beat their brains out. I'm going to respect them, but I want to be the best. And really, if you had to say what is the one common thing, the common thread of the folks that are attending MCIEF event after event after event, they want to win. They don't want anybody to know more than they know. My advice is, like I say, if you like what you're doing, then stick with this. And a group like MCIF, I think, is probably the cheapest money spent to help you achieve your career goals.
Thanks again John for sitting down for us today. Thanks for all you do, John, for the organization.
Tyler, I'll flip it around. Thanks a lot for the time that you take and the effort that you're making to help spread the word. You do a great job. We appreciate you, and I'll look forward to many great truck talks in the future with other more interesting people, and maybe you'll let me come back one day.
We'll do that, and okay. I appreciate that. Honor to be involved. Thank you, sir.